Hello, everybody. So the company I'm currently at, which is Comcast, I work out of their headquarters in Philadelphia, and I've been fortunate enough to see my career there move from software engineer to technical lead to manager of software engineers to manager of technical leads, and then back to software engineer. Now, looking back, had I known 10 years ago what I know now, I'm fairly certain I would not have taken that route. But since I did, I'm fortunate to actually know what it's like on both sides of both engineering tracks. However, this talk, it's not about me. I'm going to share personal experiences about what I've been through, what I've learned, but this talk is about the engineers that are moving up in their careers, they're doing great jobs, and they're going to be faced with the decision, do I keep doing what I'm awesome at, or do I move into management and make others just as awesome as I am? Now, in this room at least, it's very likely that you've already made that decision. But every day, there are more engineers that are becoming to this point in their careers. They're going to be faced with this choice. And they need to know, what is the proper path to take? How do I get some guidance around that? The reason I'm speaking here today is that when those engineers approach you, you can mentor them in the right way to help them make that decision. All right, it's story time. We're going to start in July 2007. This was a very important month in my life. I got married on July 1st. After our honeymoon, my wife and I moved from outside of Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, where I was going to be starting a job as a senior web developer at Comcast. In a matter of months there, I progressed to have the unofficial title of technical lead, and I was leading the development of one of Comcast's largest customer websites. I'd been working for about 10 years at that point. This is my first actual leadership role in software development. Fast forward a few months to the spring of 2008. So that was about 9 months into my job at Comcast. And a couple unrelated events occurred that led me down the path of being faced with this critical career path decision. Do I remain an individual contributor, a software engineer? Do I make the switch into management? The first event was my wife and I decided we were going to purchase a home in New Jersey. So we were going to be moving out of our apartment in Philadelphia to New Jersey. We're going to have an increased housing cost compared to our rent in Philadelphia. So on my mind was definitely the idea, I would like to be making more money if possible. I had a manager who always joked that he was so excited when someone either got married, bought a house, or had a kid because it made them more loyal software developers. And it's funny because it's actually true. I mean, these events, they're all actually, they increase your risk tolerance, and you're going to be a little more nervous if you want to switch out of your job. The second event was a conversation I had with my manager that led me to becoming a manager. It was a conversation that I started, and I actually had no idea that what I was doing was actually leading myself to become a manager. Now, at the time, Comcast had a number of different offices in Philadelphia. Basically, they were renting space in a bunch of different buildings. To help bring everybody together in the company, they were building a new building, which would be Comcast corporate headquarters, and that is the Comcast Center. So the building was nearing completion, and our team was moving there in a few months. So I approached my manager and said, I'm doing all this important work. I'm leading this team of developers for this website that's serving millions of customers every day. I feel like I deserve an office in the new building. That'll allow me to focus, and most of the senior folks have offices, and I feel like I'm performing at a senior level. So my boss says, you know what, John, that sounds great. The thing is, I can make you have an office, but in order to do that, you have to be a manager. And for me, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Managers need a door so they can close and have a private conversation. But I really hadn't thought about becoming a manager myself. I knew others that had, though. So there was one colleague that started around the same time as I did, and he took the job as a software engineer because he was promised his next step was going to be manager. So he took the job knowing that he wants to be a manager, and he said, I assure you this is going to be your next step in your career. Another individual I knew, he said, I'm working at Comcast as a software engineer until the day someone tries to make me a manager, and then I'm going to quit and open up a restaurant. Two people that clearly understood what they wanted next, and for me, I really hadn't given much thought. All I knew was that I was going to have some increased expenses soon, and I wanted to find a way to help cover those increased expenses. And I didn't know, as an individual contributor, as a software engineer, what it would take for me to reach that next step, how long that would take, what was required of that. But here I was being presented with an opportunity with a somewhat close timeline with an assumed increase in salary. So this just sounded pretty good to me, actually. So I gave it some serious thought. And while I did, I can see now looking back that I started to tell myself a number of myths to make this sound appealing. The first was that the role was the same job. When I talked to my manager about what the role would be, basically all that I heard, may not be what he said, but what I heard was that it was to be the same job. I would be leading the same engineers I was already leading, but now they would be my direct reports. And this kind of made sense. I'm already giving them direction every day on what they should be doing. If they're my direct reports, that just seems natural. And then basically I'd have to approve some vacation time here and then, and that would basically be it. Now this kind of sounds silly, but this is actually what I was thinking back then. So I'm by no means the smartest, but I like to think I have some intelligence. I was just being naive at the time. Now, I did assume that my coding time during the day at work would decrease. I at least was aware of that. But I rationalized that with, you know what, I've got nights and weekends. I can still write code then. I'll have a great time doing that. Another naive thought. I mean, you have no idea predicting what life's going to throw at you, what your life's going to be like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is before I had kids, which is my nights and weekends and then some right now. Another myth is that it's less work. Now, thinking I can code was naive. This is just a delusional thought that this is going to be less work. This came with talking to my best friend about it. I'm saying, hey, I've got this opportunity to be a manager. What do you think? He's like, you should totally go for it. I see my manager. He does nothing. I do all the work for him. I cannot wait for the day I get to be manager and just sit back, relax, and tell everybody else what they have to do. It's going to be amazing. You should totally do this. This could not be farther from the truth, though, obviously. It might seem like managers aren't doing much, but in reality, they're doing a ton of different types of work, dealing with lots of different people. And that can be very draining. Laura Hogan actually has a blog post entitled Manager Energy Drain, where she mentions that one of the most common questions she hears is, how do I handle how tired I feel as a manager? Another thing that contributes to this drain is that you end up taking on additional work, especially at the beginning of being a manager. Delegating sounds easy, but it's really not, especially at the start. When you're an individual contributor and you have a task you want to get done, it's very easy to say, you know what, I know exactly how I want to get this done. If I do it, it'll be done how I expect it to be and quickly. So instead, this type of attitude as a manager, it just doesn't scale. You end up doing more work, working more hours, and this actually stems from another myth, and that is that moving into management is a promotion. Now, it's presented that way. You're offered more money. There's this nice HR document that says, hey, the next step in your career is to be a manager. It feels like you get to stay on the same nice path that you've always been traveling on. But in reality, you make that shift into the woods, and it's this white-knuckle downhill ride. You're like, please let me make it to the bottom in one piece so I can start pedaling my way back up the mountain. And why is that? If you stay on the path that you are on, you can keep leveraging the skills that you've acquired to move yourself forward. But you move into management, especially for the first time, you're actually moving to an entry-level position. The skills that got you there are not the same skills that are going to help you advance as a manager. They certainly help, but you need to have a whole new set of responsibilities. It takes time to get back to performing at a senior level when you first move into management. Another myth is that verbal contracts are binding. They are clearly not. If you have a deal with your manager, you can move to management, but you can still code. That's going to have a short-lived but unknown expiration date. Your manager may have the best of intentions and actually believe these things that you're being told, but as soon as your manager's manager comes up with some reason that causes them to have to go back on that, or your manager leaves the company, or there's a reorg and your manager is no longer your manager, then these events can occur and someone can make a decision with no context about any previous conversations or expectations and just see manager and put them in charge of individual contributors. So despite what John of today knows, John of 10 years ago was like, you know what, I'm gonna give this manager thing a try. Seems like the right thing to do. So fast forward a few months from that initial conversation with my manager about wanting an office, and I'm a manager. I've got direct reports. I have 3 direct reports, 3 humans I'm responsible for. And I have that office I wanted, my own office, this thing I so dearly wanted, 15 floors up in the newest skyscraper in Philadelphia. Now, Comcast has grown a lot in the past 10 years, especially in Philadelphia, and that leads to my final myth, which is that I will always have an office. So right now in Philadelphia, right next to the Comcast Center, which is the one on the far left there, there's a new building being built, and it is called the Comcast Technology Center, and it is going to hold all of the engineering talent for Comcast in the Philadelphia area. My team's going to be moving there at the end of this year. And the number of individual offices in that new skyscraper, which is the largest building between right here and Chicago, dun, 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 and the clicker dies at the best part. Ah! Clickety-click. Go back, go forward. This was going to be amazing if this clicker worked at that time. I practiced this out. It was perfect.
Adam, can we switch to mine?
You can do the honors. You can click, see if it works. Hey!
Hey, that's yours working again.
Is it working again? Hey, there we go. So that was fun. So, as you saw, the answer was 0. There are 0 offices in this new building. It has lots of meeting space. It's got really fancy furniture. I can't wait to use these fancy things. But there are no offices. This is all the more reason that present me would clearly have guided past me that there should not be any value in having an office. So let's move forward a bit. I did serve as a manager at Comcast for a little bit over 2 years. During that time, I learned a lot about what it means to be a manager, what it means to lead a team, what it means to actually truly be responsible for others. The experience definitely helped me become a better engineering leader. I learned a lot about myself. I learned I could handle being a manager. I also learned it was not what I wanted to do personally, at least not right now. So how did I realize that? Now, first, I want to say for anyone, that initial shift from individual contributor to manager is hard. Humans, as a species, we prefer things that we've mastered, things that we're used to doing. You can watch a child try to learn to read or write or do math for the first time. It's frustrating. There's a struggle at the beginning. And as a manager, you need to learn an entirely new set of skills. Engineers are focused on a product and the code to drive that product. But as a manager, you're focused on the product, but also the people. Your focus is really who are the people building that product. As a developer writing code, you get a lot of quick wins throughout the day. You write some code, you refresh a browser, you see it work, it makes you feel good. That feeling probably is how you got into development in the first place. As a manager, you don't get those quick wins, unless you consider answering emails to be a quick win. So how do you feel fulfilled? For some, there's that inevitable struggle for the first 3 or 6 months. The wins are fewer, but they're bigger. But looking back, there were 3 distinct things that led me to realize that remaining on the management track was not right for me. Now first, with manager in my title, the new opportunities that were being presented to me changed. And by that I mean the types of positions that recruiters reached out to me for. Now recruiters have a bad rap in our industry, but they actually did me a favor here. So the unsolicited job offers I was getting changed from senior web developer to manager. They would entice me with the idea of I could go and build a team from scratch. I could go lead a team that was using this hot new technology. And then I realized if I was going to leave my company and go to another place, I wanted to be the one using that new technology. I wanted to be the one in the code, touching it. Even more so, if I was moving to a team that was going to be using a new library or framework, and I was not familiar with it, then I would feel that my skills as a developer would atrophy even further. At least in my current job, the team I was leading, they were working on the system that I had built. I was familiar with the code. If I had to jump into it, I was at least familiar with it, and I was aware of it. I understood what was going on there. Now, related to that, I just personally could not get past the lack of coding I was doing. I've always loved art and creating things. When I was a kid, once I realized that professional baseball player was not going to be my career, if I was asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would say, just something with art and computers. I love them both, something with that. And then the internet happened, and I'm like, this is meant for me. This is why I'm on this earth, this to make stuff for the internet. I went to college for graphic design. I have a bachelor's of fine arts in graphic design, and my beginnings of my career were actually spent half in web design and half in web development. And it's creating actual things, whether this is painting on a canvas or creating a web app, where I find happiness. So I had this feeling of emptiness inside me that just never left, because I was not contributing actual code and making actual things. I was 100% on the manager schedule and not at all on the maker schedule. So basically, my time was basically double and triple booked all day long for meetings, as opposed to having uninterrupted blocks of time. So getting into a flow state for some creative work was increasingly difficult, if not impossible. And because of that, my lizard brain was not happy. So here's the second talk about the part of your brain today. So I first heard about the lizard brain in an interview with Pamela Slim, and she's talking about the work of a woman named Martha Beck. And she mentions how one of the deepest layers of our brain is this neural structure that first evolved in reptiles. So it's referred to as the reptile brain or the lizard brain. And the entire purpose of this is to continuously broadcast survival fears that fall into 2 categories, either lack or attack. So this part of your brain is basically constantly convinced you're either lacking something essential or you're about to be attacked. Something's about like a tire is going to come and eat you up right now. Clearly, we've evolved since then, and we don't react to it all the time, but it's there and it does not shut up. So for me, my lizard brain was basically telling me all the time that I'm lacking the fun and creativity in my job. This is a job I'm spending most of my waking hours on, and this actually results in a physical reaction to the anxiety that it creates. I can remember the specific feeling of pain in my gut one day. I was driving to work from New Jersey to Philadelphia over the Ben Franklin Bridge. It's this 7-lane suspension bridge. It had light blue chipping paint, overcast day. And the Comcast Center is straight ahead. I'm just looking at it, driving in, and I just have this feeling of like pain in my gut. I'm like, I do not want to go into work today. And this is a job that I used to love to go to work every day, and I'd have to force myself to go home because I was having so much fun. Now, I'm feeling actual physical feelings inside of me, pain, for this. Even more incredible to me, as I was preparing for this talk and looking at old org charts, when I saw my name as a manager there, I felt the same pain inside of me. So it blew my mind, the fact that like the pain I felt 8, 9 years ago was still the same pain I could feel today, just to this. So our lizard brain is primitive, but it's powerful. Okay, now up to this point, I've basically made management sound like the worst job ever, and no one will ever want to be a manager. That's not my intention at all. This is very important, okay? Our industry needs more great managers, so I want people to understand both sides of it. Managers are the ones that help engineers and teams and companies to grow. Google tried an experiment where they actually had no managers. And then they were like, whoa, this is bad. We definitely need managers. So if Google can't write code to make managers obsolete, then it's clear that we need managers. And great managers are hard to find. So why is that? Gallup did an extensive study a few years ago, and the research revealed that about only 1 out of 10 people possess the talent to become a great manager. They identified these talents as the ability to motivate, assertiveness to drive outcomes, creating a culture of clear accountability, building relationships that create trust, and making decisions based on productivity and not politics. And only an additional 2 out of 10 people can become a great manager with the right training and determination. So that might sound discouraging, but there's always exceptions. Studies like this, they just look at the overall numbers, and they're taking out the power of the individual that is just so motivated and determined to accomplish something, no matter what. So instead, let's just say that 30% of people are given a head start to become managers if they choose to be. This is all the more reason that those that have the potential and desire to be a manager should be given full guidance so they can know what to expect and know what to do, how to excel as a manager. A great manager has impact far beyond their own team. By preparing them, it not only benefits the individual, it benefits the direct reports, the company, and the lives they can positively impact through the work that they do. So to be clear, I am not saying do not promote individual contributors to managers. Gallup Study found that one of the most important decisions a company can make is whom they name manager. Their study shows that when it comes to hiring managers, companies fail to choose the candidate with the right talent 80% of the time. When they do get it right, those talented managers contribute 48% higher profit than average managers. So finding and moving these folks into management is critical. We should prepare those that want to make that transition for what to expect and how to handle it properly. So personally, I want to know, there are managers out there that enjoy what they're doing a great job, they're excellent managers. I'm fortunate to work for some of them. What were they seeing and feeling that I wasn't? So I talked to folks that I knew that were successful as managers, and I also put out a survey on the internet soliciting anonymous responses for questions about management. And I first want to understand what led people into management in the first place. There were some common themes in the responses. The first was kind of this passive approach. The opportunity just kind of presented itself. Maybe there was a management position just opened up at the company, and no one on the team was going to stand up, but then one person decided, you know what, I can give it a try. Or there was a mentor or director that said, you'd be a great fit for management, and there's the position opening up. I think you should go ahead and give it a shot. I can relate to this because it kind of presented itself in my case. Then there's the active approach. Now, these folks were either looking to make a larger impact that they knew they could not make just by themselves, or there were certain practices and processes in place at their company and they wanted to change those, or they were just more interested in the process side of technology than the code itself. All these engineers seemed to have a fairly good grasp of what they wanted next in their careers, and they saw management as the way for them to meet these personal goals. Last is a more career-focused approach. These folks made the change because either they were ready for a change, they saw it as the fastest way to get a promotion and therefore more money, or they felt that there was a certain ceiling for those on the individual contributor route. And to move higher up, they would have to become a manager. Now, that depends on the company, and in some companies that is unfortunately the case. Other companies have realized that there needs to be more room for advancement for individual contributors. Taking Comcast as an example, and when I first joined, it was not clear to me what it would take to become an advanced software engineer, how high up I could go. But now that is actually clearly defined. So at Comcast, the range of engineers is from engineer 1, which is entry level, all the way up to engineer level 10. So those folks are called senior fellows. There's a few in the company, and they are expected to have the impact of a senior vice president. So it's basically the individual computer equivalent of a senior vice president. Now, for the engineers that became managers and enjoyed it, I also wanted to know, what did you find most rewarding about being a manager? What keeps you coming to work every day and makes you enjoy that? First example here was being able to combine tech skills with people skills. So instead of just using the technology that you've been using for all these years, you're able to leverage people and processes to solve technical problems. These managers focus on seeing what the gaps are in their team's processes and procedures, and then they empower the team to go ahead and come up with the best solution to addressing them. That leads to the second thing that managers cited as being most rewarding, which is building teams. And I got a really insightful comment about this, and that is that building teams is still building something. So I had felt this emptiness for not building a web app, something I can touch, but building a team, you're building something, actually. You can build a team of strong engineers who can be an advocate for the team, and if you see them succeed, that is just incredibly rewarding as a manager to help build a team in that case. In addition to the team overall, the third reward is helping others. As a manager, your role is to help your direct reports grow as individuals, as team members, and as engineers. When you manage someone, give them advice, and then later they come back and say, you know what, that advice you gave me, it actually helped me out in my career, that is incredibly fulfilling to hear that. It makes all that energy and effort worth it. If you try to get someone promoted and they finally get that promotion, you feel amazing as a manager to be the one to help better someone's life. So being a manager can be a very fulfilling role as an engineer. And as I mentioned, that initial transition, it can be difficult. So I also asked for advice from, for managers, if you can think back to when you first became a manager, what is it you wish you knew kind of going into it? And there were a few pieces of advice that came out of that. The first is that you are a leader. You're no longer measured by your individual contribution. You're measured by what the team you're leading contributes and accomplishes. You're going to be called on to make decisions that are not so much technical. Instead, they're more tactical. They're focused on processes and priority. And also, you should embrace the seniority of your position. Don't just accept that, we've always done this around here. This is how things operate. You should be an agent of change. You're a leader. You should be driving things differently. You're also going to have some harder conversations, especially when it comes to direct reports if they're not performing up to your standards or the company's standards. You're going to have some hard conversations, and it's going to feel weird. So you're actually going to not want to do that. It's just natural instinct. But don't do that. You need to have those conversations. Get coaching. Find the best way to approach those. Laura talked about this earlier. Have those conversations early. There's the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and this is an excellent guide on providing positive, constructive feedback to others that I recommend you check out. Also, there'll be other things that require your time and attention that you've never had to consider before, like budgets, for example. So be prepared for that. As I mentioned, you're not going to have the time for hands-on technical work, or at least as much as you used to. It takes a lot of time and effort to be a good manager, but it's worth that effort. So for those that want to become a manager, that's a glimpse of what it takes to be successful when you're getting started. But what if you're like I was? You make that shift into management. After a while, you're like, you know what? It's just not right. I need to switch back. How do you make that switch? Now, the transition back to individual contributor from manager, it's not simple. There's not just one way. It's not impossible, although some people feel that it is. I've actually hired engineers that were working as a manager, and they wanted to shift back to being an engineer, and they felt the only way to do that was to actually leave the company. And that's a loss for the company, but I was happy to hire them because I knew what they wanted. They knew they wanted to be an engineer, and I'm happy to bring them on my team. Also, when you're going to go into a technical interview, you may not have, your skills might be rusty. You need to do extra work to prepare. But that's stuff you can overcome for sure. Now, humans resist change, even if the change is good. And there are social pressures and mental barriers around you that you may not even realize that could prevent you from actually making the switch back. One barrier I had to overcome was knowing the fact that there were people that recommended that I become a manager and folks that looked up to me because I was a manager, and I have to face them and say, you know what? I shifted out of that path. It wasn't right for me. And then prepare for the, are you crazy? Why would you possibly do that sort of thing? I'd be ready for those conversations. Another thing I recall in social situations was that I would be asked, oh, I hear you're a manager. How many direct reports do you have? As if my answer to that somehow validated my position in the world somehow, which is just bizarre. And the answer was, of course, going to be 0 after the fact. But as a lead engineer, you can still impact other lives. And right now, the team I'm on, I helped build that team. Leading that team, there's over 20 engineers, and I never had 20 direct reports, but I'm now leading a team of many. But thinking back then, I was thinking, I'd have to go back to these folks I had talked about that with, and if they asked, hey, how many direct reports do you have now? And the answer would be 0, and just have to face these mental barriers in my head. So once you get over those, how do you go ahead and make the switch? There's no one right way, but there are ways to make it easier. And it all comes down to having a plan. If you can find someone that actually wants to be a manager, then you are more prepared than anyone to help actually lead them to be a manager into your own role itself there. Also, you clearly need to talk to your own manager and work on a transition plan with that person. It's their job to make your career progress in a way that's best suited for you. Then when the transition plan is in place, if you could actually time it with a reorg, that would work out really well. If that works out, great. But if not, you can still make it happen. Once you're manager and you figure out that plan, then the date comes to actually go ahead and face everyone and say, you know what, you're no longer a manager. Now, the best way to handle this is actually first to talk to your direct reports, let them know the decision you made, why you made that, so that they can then understand, that it was you making that decision. And hopefully this provides confidence in them to know that they're working at a company that will actually allow this sort of career flexibility. Then the time comes where it actually is communicated out broadly to your company and across others. Now, you're probably not going to have control over how that communication happens. For me, basically, the shift from my direct reports, they just shifted off to be reporting to my manager, and that kind of happened on the side. But then within a few weeks, there was a reorg in my group, and there was a meeting, and then during that meeting, there was a org chart that was put up. And this was the first time in a couple years where my name was there with nothing underneath of it. So then obviously people come up to me afterwards just like, John, what's going on? What happened here? And I just basically said, with a huge smile, just like, hey, you know what? I'm glad I got the opportunity to try out management. I realized it's not for me, and I'm going to get back to writing code again, and I'm really happy about that. So I hope that insight is a valuable look into the range of things engineers could consider when trying to decide to try management or not, or shift out of it. I'm going to close with a few suggestions to help guide others in making this decision. The first is to talk to others that are ahead of you on both engineering tracks. I personally did speak with someone that was a manager, and he told me that I should not become a manager. He's like, John, this is not for you. I wish I wrote down the exact reason why, because he reminds me to this day that he was right about my decision. But it's important to speak to people that are not just your manager, because your manager is going to have some implicit bias, because your manager is going to know, I need a manager, I need individual contributors. So it's good to speak to people outside of your actual group, or at least separate than your manager itself. Next, consider what you really enjoy about your work that you do. If you had free time at work or at home, would you want to be spending time writing code or learning to be a better manager and learning to be a better leader? Now, I'm not saying that you need to actually do that. It's just a mental exercise to help you kind of make that decision. Another approach to this is if you're at a conference that has multiple tracks, do you want to go to the technology tracks that are focused on new technologies, or do you want to focus on tracks that are more kind of focused on managers and engineering leaders? There's a saying, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. But that saying actually isn't true. If you love what you do, you're going to work harder every day because you love the work that you're doing. So you're more willing to put in the hard work. Third is to immerse yourself in the skills of a manager before actually becoming a manager. Now, there's a few ways to do this. First, I recommend basically consuming as much content as you can at the beginning. Folks like Laura Hogan, Camille Fournier, they've created a bunch of amazing content around what it means to be a manager in engineering. So read their blog posts, watch their talks, buy their books. Their advice actually informs my final 2 suggestions, and they are to do public speaking. Now, this holds true for all engineering leaders, and particularly for managers, because it helps with your communication skills, it helps with your presentation skills. And last, be a mentor. As Camille says in her book, The Manager's Path, having a mentee is an opportunity to learn about what it means to be a manager and be responsible for someone in a fairly safe environment. If you fail horribly as a mentor, the impact it's not that bad. That was not so great, but again, it's not the same impact as if you were a manager for multiple people and then failed horribly at being a manager. So those exercises should help engineers get a better grasp about what they want to do next in their careers. For those that do make the move into management, they'll be better prepared with your advice. And remember, be sure to check on them in the beginning months because they're going to need some coaching through the initial challenges that they're going to encounter. For all of us, no matter what we do, our value is measured by the positive impact we have on others, either directly or indirectly. I just shared what I wish was shared with me 10 years ago. I hope you found it valuable. If you've already surpassed this point in your career, please take what I've shared, put your spin on it, and share your wealth of knowledge with others that are approaching this critical point in their careers. Here are some of the resources I mentioned during my talk, as well as a few others. I'll tweet about these. I'll put them in Slack. Thank you all for your time.